where were you when you got the call?
I was on my ranch. It was a very, golly, it was a neat ending of my career.
I hate his guts. Those 4 words were not said once. They were not said by one person. They were said over and over across different cities, different decades, different dugouts. Teammates said it. Reporters said it. People who worked beside this man every single day said it. And here is the part that will get you. The man they were saying it about is now in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. One of the greatest offensive second basemen in the history of the sport. So how does a guy become a legend, break records, win MVP awards, and still end up with this many enemies? That is the story we are telling today. I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. If you are into real clubhouse stories like this one, do me a favor right now. Hit the hype feature and give this video some hype. It takes 1 second, and it genuinely helps these stories reach more people. And trust me, this story is one you are going to want people to see. Now let us start with where we are today, because the ending of this story is what makes the whole thing hit different. On December 7th, 2025, the Contemporary Baseball Player Era Committee met and voted. When the results came in, Jeff Kent had received 14 out of 16 votes. That is 87.5%, more than enough. He was officially elected to the National Baseball Hall of Fame as the first member of the class of 2026. The man who holds the all-time record for home runs hit by a second baseman, 377 of them, finally got his plaque in Cooperstown after years and years of waiting. But here is why that moment matters so much to this story. Getting to Cooperstown took a very long time. For 9 straight years on the Baseball Writers Association of America ballot, Kent could not get past 33% of the vote. The writers who covered baseball, many of whom had dealt with Kent personally in press boxes and clubhouses, used their Hall of Fame votes the way some people use a grudge. They held on. They withheld. His personality, his conflicts, his wars with the press, all of it sat on top of his statistics like a weight that numbers alone could not lift. In his 10th and final year on the writer's ballot, he finally surged to 46.5%. That jump sent a message to the Era Committee that followed. And the committee, made of former players, executives, and media veterans who decided to prioritize his historic offensive production over his historic personal difficulties, put him over the top. So the question the whole baseball world has been wrestling with is simple. Who were the people Jeff Kent made into enemies? And why did the hatred run so deep and so wide? We are going to answer that question today, but we are not starting from the beginning and going forward. We're going in reverse. We are starting at the last feud and working our way back. Because the final enemy Kent made in his career might be the most shocking one on the entire list. Number 5, Vin Scully and the media. To understand why this entry is so stunning, you have to understand who Vin Scully was to the city of Los Angeles. Scully was not just a baseball broadcaster. He was a civic institution. He called Dodger games for 67 years. 67 years. 3 generations of Los Angeles families grew up with his voice as the soundtrack to summer. Kids fell asleep in the back seats of cars with the game on the radio. Fathers listened while doing yard work. Grandparents followed every word from their living rooms. His voice was warmth and history and home all at once. In Los Angeles, criticizing Vin Scully was roughly equivalent to criticizing the air people breathe. Jeff Kent criticized Vin Scully. The year was 2008, and Kent was 40 years old, playing out the final season of his career with the Los Angeles Dodgers. The team made a midseason move that changed everything. They acquired Manny Ramirez. Manny was one of the most feared hitters in baseball, and the second he joined the lineup directly behind Kent in the batting order, opposing pitchers faced a problem. They did not want to walk Kent and then have to face Ramirez with a man on base. So they started throwing Kent strikes, good strikes, the kind of pitches you can hit. And Kent started absolutely punishing them. In the weeks immediately following the Ramirez trade, Kent batted .500 at age 40. It was remarkable. Vin Scully, doing exactly what Hall of Fame broadcasters do, observed this on air. He noted that Kent was benefiting enormously from hitting in front of Ramirez. He pointed out the strategic dynamic. It was an accurate observation. It was the kind of baseball insight that made Scully great. The numbers supported it fully. There was nothing unfair about it. Kent did not see it that way. He sat down with a reporter named TJ Simers, and he unloaded. He said that Vin Scully talks too much. He said he was completely tired of the conversation. He said that framing his success as dependent on a teammate diminished his entire career and all the hard work he had put into it over the years. He said he took it as a personal insult. And then, in case one attack was not enough, he called Scully some guy on TV. He added, as if this would somehow help his case, that in 4 seasons with the Dodgers, he had never once seen Scully come down into the clubhouse. As if the absence of a legendary broadcaster from a team's locker room was a meaningful criticism. As if Vin Scully was somehow less valid a voice because he did not hang around with players before games. When the reporter pushed back on how offensive the remarks were, Kent laughed. He said he had told this same thing to 200 women at a Dodgers organizational event, and they had laughed. He then added, "We all love you, Vin, but you still talk too much," apparently thinking that wrapping an insult in an expression of love made it not an insult. It did not work. The backlash was immediate, and it was severe. Dodger fans who had tolerated Kent's difficult personality for years had a limit, and attacking Vin Scully was past it. The organization was embarrassed. Writers across the country could not believe what they were reading. Here was a player in the final months of his career, a player who needed all the goodwill he could build for future Hall of Fame consideration, publicly going after the most beloved figure in the franchise's history. Scully himself, being the consummate professional he had always been, said nothing. He did not respond. He did not fire back. He did not even acknowledge the remarks publicly. He simply kept doing his job at the highest level, the way he had done it for more than 6 decades. And somehow that silence made Kent look even worse. Because when you throw punches at someone and they do not even acknowledge you, it says something about the difference in your respective statures. The reporter Simers wrote something about Kent during this period that captured the whole thing perfectly. He joked that sometimes you wonder if Kent sleeps with his bed against a wall, forcing him to always wake up on the wrong side. It landed as a joke, but it stuck because it felt exactly right. And there was something else Kent told Simers around this same time, something about his personal life that was not baseball related at all. He said he does not care about birthdays or anniversaries. He mentioned that his wife had just turned 40 and he had not bought her a card. He said it casually, like it was just a fact about himself. No apology, no self-consciousness, just a matter-of-fact statement about who he was. When you add that to everything else, the attacks on reporters, the refusal to connect with teammates, the Vin Scully moment, the comment about his wife's birthday, you start to see a complete portrait. This was not a man who had occasional bad days or clashed with specific personalities. This was a man who had built his entire identity around a kind of hard, closed-off self-sufficiency that had no room for warmth of any kind. The war with the media had been ongoing for his entire career. Long before Scully, Kent routinely antagonized reporters. He once told a group of writers directly that they were the reason nobody liked the press. He believed that journalists built stories and narratives that were designed to take credit away from individual effort. Every time a broadcaster or writer said a player was helped by his lineup or his manager or his ballpark, Kent heard a theft. Someone was stealing from his personal account of hard work. He could not accept that context matters, that teammates matter, that the environment around you shapes what you are able to do. That inability to accept interdependence was the engine of every conflict on this list. Number 4, Milton Bradley. Before we get into what Milton Bradley actually said about Jeff Kent, we should be honest about who Milton Bradley was. Bradley had severe personal issues. He had confrontations with fans and umpires throughout his career. He was involved in domestic violence arrests. He was one of the most volatile players of his generation. Pointing all of that out is not to dismiss what he observed about Kent. It is just context. Because what Bradley said about Kent was validated by people who had no reason to agree with Bradley on anything. Bradley joined the Los Angeles Dodgers in 2005. He was 27 years old and already carrying a reputation as someone who could explode without warning. Kent was the veteran on that team, the established presence, the guy who was supposed to provide leadership and stability. That is not an informal role. In professional baseball, veteran players are expected to model the culture of the clubhouse for the guys coming up behind them. Bradley watched Kent, and what he saw bothered him. Kent had his locker in the corner of the clubhouse. He put his headphones in when he arrived, and he did not take them out. He read motocross magazines while his teammates tried to connect with him. He was physically in the room, but emotionally somewhere entirely else. He made no effort to mingle. He made no effort to make the younger players feel seen or included. He built a bubble around himself and stayed inside it every single day. Bradley went to the press. He said, if you are going to be the leader of the team, then you need to mingle with the team and associate with the team. He said, you cannot have your locker in the corner, put your headphones in, and sit there reading a motocross magazine. He said Kent was in his own world, while everybody else was in this world. It was pointed, it was public, and most importantly, it was accurate. People who had played with Kent in San Francisco, people who had covered him for years, people who had watched the pattern across multiple cities and multiple organizations, all agreed with the substance of what Bradley was saying, even if they had complicated feelings about Bradley as a messenger. And then Bradley escalated. He accused Kent of racial insensitivity. He said Kent did not know how to deal with African American players and made comments under the guise of jokes that were offensive and dismissive. The accusation was serious. When Kent responded, he relied on one of the most criticized defenses in American culture. He essentially pointed to the fact that some of his friends were black as evidence that he could not have said anything racially insensitive. That defense has never held up for anyone, and it did not hold up for Kent. The Dodgers traded Bradley after the 2005 season. His own issues were too numerous and too serious to ignore. But Bradley's departure did not erase what he had said. The story lived on, and what made it live on was what Kent himself confirmed later. In 2008, the same year of the Scully incident, Kent told the Los Angeles Times something that he clearly thought was just a candid statement about his lifestyle. He said he does not hang out with the guys and never has. He does not go out drinking. He does not have a social life built around his teammates. And then he said the word that summed it all up. He said that makes him selfish. His word, not a reporter's word, not a critic's word, Kent's own word about himself. When he retired from baseball in the fall of 2008, sports writers noted what they called 0 documented friends on his professional resume. Not one teammate who came forward to publicly call him a close personal friend. Not one relationship from his career that produced the kind of bond players usually describe when they talk about the brothers they made in the game. 0. In a sport where the language of brotherhood and trust and shared sacrifice is woven into everything, Kent had spent 17 years choosing to opt out of all of it. Number 3, David Bell. David Bell never started a fight with Jeff Kent. He never raised his voice at Kent. He never went to the press to criticize Kent. He was, in every way that you could measure, a completely uninvolved party in the most famous conflict of his career. And that is almost the saddest thing about his place in this story. Bell was a third baseman for the San Francisco Giants during the peak years of Kent's time there. He was a professional. Not a superstar, but a reliable, solid player. The kind of guy who shows up on time, works hard, and tries to stay out of drama. On June 25th, 2002, in a game against the San Diego Padres, Bell made a defensive error. It happens. Baseball is a sport where failure is built into the design. Even the best third basemen in the world make errors. It is part of the game. The question is always how a team responds to those inevitable mistakes. Kent's response was to berate Bell, in the dugout, in front of everyone. He got on Bell hard, publicly, in a way that crossed the line from competitive frustration into something that felt like humiliation. Bell, to his credit, did not escalate. He absorbed it. What happened next is the reason this moment is still talked about. Barry Bonds stepped in to defend Bell. Bonds intervened between Kent and Bell, and what started as a verbal confrontation became physical. Bonds grabbed Kent. Bonds shoved him against the dugout wall. Television cameras caught the whole thing in real time. Manager Dusty Baker had to physically get into the middle of it and separate them. Kent went to the press afterward and called it no big deal. He revealed, with no apparent embarrassment, that he and Bonds had gotten physical with each other at least a half dozen times since becoming teammates in 1997. Half a dozen physical altercations with a teammate in 5 years. And to Kent, that was just no big deal. What happened in the rest of that game was the kind of irony that makes baseball feel like theater. In the very next half inning, after the dugout brawl, Barry Bonds hit a 3-run home run. Later in the game, Kent himself homered and helped seal the victory. Two men who had just been physically fighting in the dugout both went out and hit home runs and won the game together. If you wrote that in a movie, nobody would believe it. Bell, the man at the center of everything, just played. He did not become Kent's enemy out of choice. He was made into a symbol of Kent's pattern, the pattern of aggressive public correction, the pattern of making teammates' mistakes into personal confrontations, the pattern of policing the people around you instead of supporting them. There was something Baker revealed years later that adds one more strange layer to the Bell story. He shared an email Kent had sent to Bell at some point during their time together. In the email, Kent told Bell something along the lines of asking him not to play so angry because it would make things harder on himself. He called Bell his soul Mormon brother. It was protective. In a strange way, it showed that Kent did think about Bell and cared in some capacity about his well-being. But care expressed through confrontation and private messages, rather than warmth and openness, is not the kind of care that makes people feel supported. It makes them feel managed. And feeling managed by a teammate you never chose as a manager is its own kind of misery. Number 2, Dusty Baker. Dusty Baker will tell you he never hated Jeff Kent, and he is probably telling the truth. Baker was a manager who understood difficult personalities. He had been a player himself in competitive, high-pressure environments. He had seen the full range of human behavior in professional baseball. He believed genuinely that friction could coexist with success. He said it publicly and often. He said, "Bad teams always get along." That belief was both his greatest strength and his greatest burden during the 6 years he managed Kent and Bonds in San Francisco. Baker's management style with volatile personalities was built entirely on containment. What happens in the clubhouse stays in the clubhouse. You do not go to the press. You do not publicly criticize your stars. You absorb, mediate, redirect, and move on. He was a human pressure valve. When the temperature in the room got too high, Baker was there to lower it before it blew. What that looked like in practice, with Kent and Bonds on the same team, was exhausting. Every single day, Baker was managing 2 Hall of Fame level talents who could not stand each other. Every game day required awareness of where the tension was, who had said what, whether a particular interaction was going to boil over during the game or after it. He was a coach, a therapist, a diplomat, and a babysitter all at once. The June 2002 dugout fight was the most visible moment of that entire tension, but it was not unique. Kent himself said the physical confrontations between him and Bonds numbered at least 6 in 5 years. 6. Baker had to manage the aftermath of each of those. He had to keep the team together. He had to protect both players from the press. He had to stand in front of every camera and microphone and speak about competitive intensity and winning culture, rather than what was actually happening. And he managed it. He kept that team together. He got them to the World Series in 2002, which was an extraordinary achievement given everything he was navigating. The Giants took the Anaheim Angels to 7 games and came within a few outs of winning the championship. It was one of the most memorable fall classics in recent history. They lost. And then everything fell apart. Baker left the Giants after that season to manage the Chicago Cubs. Kent departed as a free agent. David Bell left. Outfielder Reggie Sanders left. The collection of difficult, talented people that Baker had held together through sheer professional discipline scattered in different directions. The team that had pushed itself to the edge of a championship was gone in one offseason. Baker never blamed Kent publicly. He was always careful with his words when the subject came up. But you do not spend 6 years managing that level of interpersonal chaos without it leaving a mark. Baker was one of the best managers of his generation. He deserved better than what that situation asked of him. Number 1, Barry Bonds. Everything else on this list is fascinating. Everything else tells you something important about Jeff Kent and the pattern of his behavior, but none of it hits the way this one does. Because this is the one that started on day 1 and never stopped. Spring training 1997, Scottsdale, Arizona, the first day of Cactus League workouts. Kent had just been acquired in a trade from the Cleveland Indians. He was new to the organization and new to the city. He did not know his teammates yet. He had not established himself in the San Francisco hierarchy. He boarded the team shuttle van. He sat down in the front row. Barry Bonds got on that van. At that moment in 1997, Bonds was already one of the most dominant players in baseball. He had won 3 MVP awards. He was the unquestioned face of the Giants franchise. He was the man the entire organization was built around. He sat where he sat, and people knew not to challenge that without a very good reason. Bonds saw Kent in the front row. He told Kent that the front row was his seat. He told Kent to move to the back. Kent looked at him and said no. He said he was there first. He said Bonds arrived after him. He told Bonds that if someone needed to sit in the back, it was Bonds. First baseman JT Snow was on that van. He talked about it later and described the absolute shock in the vehicle when Kent said those words. Nobody did that. Nobody talked to Bonds that way. Not a newcomer, not a player who had been there 5 minutes, not anyone who understood how the hierarchy of a professional baseball clubhouse worked. Bonds eventually sat in the back. He did not have a choice because Kent was not moving. And in that moment, the tone of their entire 6-year partnership was set. Not by accident, not by miscommunication, by Kent making a deliberate choice on his very first day to let the franchise player know that he was not going to defer. Not then, not ever. What followed was one of the most remarkable and strange partnerships in the history of professional sports. On the field, they were electric together. Between 1997 and 2002, Bonds hit close to 300 home runs. years and continued building what would become the most statistically dominant offensive run in baseball history. Kent won the National League Most Valuable Player Award in 2000, largely because Bonds did not play enough games that year to be a serious contender. In a normal year, Bonds would have won it. Kent knew that. He knew his MVP came in part because the best player on his own team was unavailable. He got the award anyway. They went to the World Series in 2002. They were extraordinary together in ways that numbers cannot fully capture. And off the field, they had absolutely nothing. No friendship, no warmth, no dinners or conversations that were not directly required by the game. Kent described their relationship in 2002 with the kind of brutal honesty that people rarely offer about their own lives. He said on the field they were fine, but off the field, he did not care about Barry, and Barry did not care about him, or about anybody. That last part, or about anybody, was a quiet acknowledgement that the isolation was not unique to their dynamic. It was just who they both were, in different ways. And then came June 25th, 2002, the Padres game, the dugout, David Bell's error and Kent's response to it, Bonds stepping in, the physical escalation that played out in front of television cameras, Bonds grabbing Kent, shoving him against the wall, Baker rushing in to separate them. Kent went to the press and said, "No big deal." He confirmed half a dozen altercations in 5 years and shrugged it off like it was the cost of doing business. They both homered that day. There is almost nothing else to say about that, except that it is completely perfect as a summary of the Kent and Bonds relationship. Conflict and production, violence and victory, dislike and dominance, all coexisting in the same 6-year period on the same team in the same city. There is something worth pausing on about what that relationship cost both men, even if neither would admit it. They had the chance to be one of the most celebrated partnerships in the history of the sport. Two Hall of Fame talents playing together at their peaks, building something that fans would have talked about forever with genuine warmth. Instead, they built something people talk about forever because it is almost impossible to believe. Two men who could not stand each other, producing at historic levels, fighting in dugouts, and somehow making it work on the field. It is impressive in its own strange way, but it is also a loss. Because the version where they respected each other, where the talent was matched by even a basic level of mutual regard, would have been something genuinely beautiful to watch. Kent chose a different version. He always chose a different version. When Kent left San Francisco after the 2002 season, there was no dramatic farewell, no speeches, no expressions of mutual respect that anyone has ever been able to document. He had been the greatest offensive second baseman in the history of the San Francisco Giants. He had helped take them to the World Series, and he left the same way he had arrived, with his walls up and his bridges unbuilt. Now let us pull the camera all the way back, because if you look at every single name on this list, every single conflict, every single moment of friction that defined Kent's career, there is a thread that runs through all of it. And that thread goes back much further than San Francisco. Kent grew up with a disciplinarian father who drilled a perfectionist mentality into him from childhood. That intensity, that refusal to accept anything less than his own standard, was the source of both his greatness and his impossibility. It was not something he developed as a professional. He arrived with it fully formed. At Edison High School, he was dismissed from his own baseball team for refusing a coach's order to change defensive positions. He paid a real price for that choice. Athletic scholarships went away. Opportunities narrowed. He stood firm, and he paid for it. And he did it anyway. Because bending was not something Jeff Kent did. Not for coaches, not for franchise icons, not for beloved broadcasters, not for any single person. When the Mets traded for him in 1992, receiving him in exchange for pitcher David Cone, who was a beloved star at Shea Stadium, the reception was already cold before Kent played a game. The Cone trade was unpopular. The Mets fans who called themselves the Coneheads were angry about losing their guy. Kent did not charm them. He batted .239 and showed no inclination toward making friends with anyone in the organization. And then came the road trip to Montreal. Baseball hazing has a long and complicated history. Veterans taking rookies' clothes and replacing them with embarrassing outfits was a tradition across the sport. The idea was to humble the new guys, to create a shared experience, to bring them into the group through a ritual of collective embarrassment. Rookies who participated came out the other side more connected to the team. The experience became a story they could all laugh about later. The Mets veterans got Kent a flamboyant pimp costume, flashy, ridiculous, designed to embarrass in a harmless way. The expectation was that Kent would go along with it, the way rookies had always gone along with it. He went into the clubhouse and demanded his actual clothes back. He told his teammates that he had already paid his dues in Toronto, his previous organization. He said he had endured his embarrassments. He said he felt he was being taken advantage of. He said he was not going to be pushed around. His teammates responded by mocking him. They gave him a nickname, Clark, as a reference to his stiff and rigid demeanor. They walked around asking him where his clothes were. It was not kind, but it was a direct response to a choice Kent had made. He had the option to participate, to belong, to turn an awkward moment into a bonding story. He chose separation instead. Think about what that choice signaled to the people who witnessed it. Baseball clubhouses run on unwritten rules. They run on an understanding that being part of a team means occasionally doing things that are uncomfortable for the sake of the group. The hazing tradition was not elegant. It was not sophisticated, but it served a social function. It said, "You are new here, and to become one of us, you have to show that you are willing to be vulnerable in front of us." Kent looked at that invitation to belong and walked away from it without hesitation. He was not embarrassed about it. He was not apologetic. He was proud of it. He had stood up for himself. He had won, and he could not see that in winning that battle, he had lost something much larger. The locker room never fully opened up to him in New York because he had made it clear on his very first test that he was not interested in the terms of membership. That is not a small thing in a world where trust is the currency that everything else is built on. That choice in a Montreal locker room in 1992 was the first version of every future choice Kent would make. The van seat, the dugout fight, the corner locker with headphones, the attacks on reporters, the Vin Scully moment, every single one of them is just a variation of the same refusal. The refusal to give ground. The refusal to play by anyone else's rules. The refusal to be pushed around. After the Giants years, Kent went to Houston and signed with the Astros. Craig Biggio, one of the most respected players in baseball, one of Houston's all-time icons, moved himself from second base to center field to make room for Kent at the position. It was an extraordinary act of selflessness. The local media celebrated Biggio for it, and in celebrating Biggio, they drew an obvious contrast with the player who had required such accommodation. The man moving for the team, the man the team was moving around. The Dodgers' years gave us Bradley and Scully, and the final proof that the pattern had not softened with age. And then Kent retired in 2008 with his statistics and his record and his empty contact list and drove off into whatever came next. What came next, 4 years later in 2012, was Survivor Philippines. Jeff Kent on a reality television show. A show built entirely on social skills, alliance formation, trust building, and the ability to make people feel connected to you. A show where the physical challenges are almost secondary to the social game. Kent was voted out on day 19. His exit speech on the show was something that sports sociologists later pointed to as the most honest post-career summary of his personality available. He talked about his major league earnings. He said he did not need the prize money, but wanted it badly. He said the president was going to take 40% of it anyway. He was bitter and defensive and completely unwilling to look inward at any of the social dynamics that had led to his elimination. Same voice, different stage. And then, December 7th, 2025, 14 votes out of 16, Hall of Fame. What does all of this mean? What do we take from the career of Jeff Kent? A man who was great at baseball and impossible as a human being. A man who held the record for the most home runs ever hit by a second baseman and the record for the most bridges burned by any player in his era. Here is what it means. Here is the lesson that actually holds up. Talent is real, character is real, and they are completely separate from each other. You can be historically elite at your job and historically difficult as a person at the exact same time. Those two facts do not cancel each other out. They coexist whether you want them to or not. Kent's home run record is true. His 2000 MVP is true. His World Series appearance is true. The fact that Cooperstown could not ultimately ignore his production is true. And the stories from every clubhouse he ever walked through, the hazing refusal in Montreal, the van seat in Scottsdale, the dugout in San Francisco, the corner locker in Los Angeles, the attack on Vin Scully, all of those are equally true. The path he chose worked. He made it to the Hall of Fame, but it took 9 extra years, and it required an era committee to finally push him over the line, because the writers who had sat in his press conferences for 17 years could not bring themselves to do it. He got there, just barely, and late, and surrounded by the memory of every person he had pushed away along the road. There are players in Cooperstown who hit fewer home runs than Jeff Kent, but who are remembered with a warmth and a love that he will never experience. The kind of legacy that comes from people who were glad to play beside you, glad to know you, glad to say your name. That legacy is real too. It matters in ways that statistics cannot measure and that plaques cannot replace. The best version of a baseball life, the version worth reaching for, combines everything Jeff Kent had on the field with something he never found off it. The ability to be great and to be someone your teammates were genuinely glad to stand next to. That combination is rarer than any single talent. It is harder than any individual achievement, and it is worth more than any record. The most painful part of the entire Jeff Kent story, when you look at it from a distance, is not the feuds. It is not the Vin Scully moment. It is not the van seat or the dugout or the corner locker with the headphones. The most painful part is that none of it was necessary. Kent had everything it takes to be genuinely beloved. He was talented enough to earn respect from anyone. He was disciplined enough to have been a model professional. He had the drive and the focus and the competitive fire that teammates look for in a leader. He had all the raw materials. He just never built anything with them except individual statistics. And when the career was over, the statistics stayed. Everything else had already gone. Jeff Kent was exactly half of that. An extraordinary, record-setting, completely undeniable Hall of Fame half. If this story got you thinking, drop a comment below and tell me your take. Did the Era Committee get it right by voting him in? Or do you think the writers had a point all along? Like this video if you want more stories like this one, and subscribe to Baseball Icons so you never miss what is coming next.